Welcome, friends. Today we are delighted to spend some time with you reflecting on our third season. That means we've had over 60 episodes so far, and we just learned that we've had over 7,500 downloads.
Woo,
Isn't that
woo.
cool? Yeah. Thank you all so much for your support. That's so great. And this last season, we were inspired by artists, authors, public speakers, and quite a few death doulas. We met people working with the incarcerated, the LGBTQ community, the BIPOC culture, and even with people who are communicating with those who've passed, and much more.
Yes. What a fun season we had here with our all of our guests who showed up. And they're sharing their gifts with us. And one such person, an artist we got to know, is Dr. Tamara McIntyre. She shared with us the new old kind of technology, artistic blending, reimagining how a death practice would come to be by making hand woven willow coffins.
That was
That
cool.
was really fun. Yeah, like I wanted to be a part of that.
Yeah, I want one.
Oh, right? Okay. We invited authors like Miss Rusty Rossman, an octogenarian who just published her first book. And she was so inspired to write a book called Two Envelopes, where she talks about people who need to leave an envelope for the just in case I die and somebody needs to know my wishes. And the other one can go out to all of the other folks who really need to know. But she was very committed to this and was
Yeah.
very excited to share this information with us through her book.
Yeah, I think the second one also had like love letters. I love that. Love letters
Yeah.
to your family. That was such a great idea.
So sweet. Such a sweet woman.
Yeah.
We also had Mr. Rich Nisbet, who wrote a book called Helping Children and Adults Find Meaning in Death, which is his way of helping kids understand the cycle of life through the loss of a loved one, a family member, and how community and the continuity of life continues in spite of a death. We also invited Mr. Michael Erard, who I absolutely enjoyed so much, who wrote a book called Last Words and First Words and how they relate, which was really interesting in his research into focusing on the first words of children and babies and the last words of the dying. It was one of those moments when I realized like death and dying, birth and death, all of this, like it's just so interconnected and so woven together.
Yeah, beautiful cycle. I liked what he said about there being an what do you call it? Communication window. I think that's what he called it, something like that, where it grows when you're a baby. It gets bigger
Mhm.
and bigger and bigger, and different, like everything from gestures to sounds, and then it starts shrinking when you're dying. And it was very fascinating to compare the two.
It
I love
was,
that.
and one of the really and I still think about this all the time actually,
Yeah,
and this whole notion that communication we have this kind of ableist or languagist perception
yeah,
of how people are talking and communicating, when in fact, sometimes people say, "Well, my uncle stopped speaking," and in fact, people continue to reach out to us through the minimal gestures or
hmm
just feeling into what it seems like to be in that space with this person. I loved his work, and I hope
yeah,
more people get to understand how communication happens on so many different levels.
right. Yeah, we're going to talk about more of that in a minute here because we have yet another level. But we also spoke to doulas, many death doulas actually. We had one, Neshia Alave, who is Black and Samoan, a disabled mama, poet, and death worker. She really cares about connecting cultural wisdom, ancestral resilience, and BIPOC joy to empower how we live and die. She founded an organization called A Thoughtful Death, which was a really amazing person, a really amazing idea, and I love what she's doing. We also published one called What is a Death Doula? We brought in four different doulas to talk to us about why they became death doulas and personal stories, like how were they inspired and what was their specialties. Each of them had a different kind of approach, which also was pretty fascinating. We had one premium episode in case you for our subscribers who are paid subscribers called How to Become a Death Doula. And that's actually a video episode like this one. And finally we met others. We met Layela Kelly, who founded an organization called Leaving Well, which is really for serving individuals and families want to seek or navigating end of life transitions with grace and dignity and peace. all of these doulas were just such amazing, lovely people. We really were honored to spend time with them. And I really hope that more people understand that there are such a thing as death doulas and what their work is. It's so important to know and so useful and
It
part of
is.
that work at the end of life. Yeah.
It is. And, just one last thought with doulas. And I hope that folks will join our paid subscriber list there because it really is interesting to see what each of these doulas bring to the process at the end of life, how they support families and the folks who are dying. And it's not a one size fits all. You find some of them who are coming from the nursing sector, others who are coming from, poetry or birth doulas, but they're all showing up with these very unique gifts. So I hope that all of you listening will just kind of live into their mystery and go listen to some of these because they are
Yeah.
delightful humans.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and so after the death doula work, we have more death doulas doing more interesting parts of their training and their cycles of holiness. There's quite a few of our guests who are called to serve those who are in their grief cycles. Just because we talk about death and dying, end of life, the dying process continues even after our loved one has passed. Some
Yeah,
of those folks are needing support. So
absolutely.
a few of our doulas have begun little programs or little classes or little communities to continue to support those who are struggling through their grief. Karen Carlisi and Phoenix have started a group for people who have lost children, whether through death, estrangement, incarceration, or illness. And what I absolutely adored about these two women and the work that they're doing is that anyone who has lost a child, be it a child at 6 months, 6 years, or 60 years. They're all children. They're still our babies. And they will hold that grief and help us through that in any capacity that they can find.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I adored that.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just noting too that there's so many people that I've met that I've told about this class. A lot of people have lost children. It's kind of amazing, and they're so pleased to hear that there's a place where they can go and join a community of people that understand, who have gone through it, and are able to work together with these brilliant Karen
Yes,
and Phoenix who really know the world that they're working with.
they do. And I love that, Wakil, that you have met people who are surprised that there's a place for them. You know, and it just occurred to me too that one of the stories that we hear on that podcast was they had their first group and they had invited people who had lost children and there was
Yeah,
a variety of people, but they also found that there were like miscarriage
yeah,
and abortions,
yeah,
and all of those were similar griefs. They were
yeah,
not going to be, there wasn't like a pecking order of whose child mattered more or had deeper grief. They were
absolutely.
all children who had passed.
Yeah,
And that is right there. For me, it's revolutionary
yeah, yeah.
and, so important for people.
Huge, very profound.
It is. So, other people are starting to think about grief and grief cycles and how to metabolize what's going on in your soul. And we interviewed Mirabai Starr, who is committed to serving those who are deep in their grief cycles. She has also lost a child. She has experienced deaths in different like levels and varieties. She comes with a lot of experience in this realm, and she and a young woman named Willow Brook co-created the Wild Heart Space Community. Here they gather with others who are metabolizing their own grief with spiritual support. I think it's monthly check-ins,
Yeah,
online classes, and
yeah.
actually I think they actually have met in situ some places too. So
Oh, yeah, yeah. They actually, Mirabai is a very good friend of mine who writes many, many books on spirituality, mysticism, and beautiful things. But one of her, as you said, in her autobiography, she speaks to having lost her 14-year-old daughter to a car accident. And it's just so profound. And so I think that's partially what inspired her to create this thing. And Willow is another friend, and they just met and started talking about how the idea of phases of grief were okay and are well known, but that there are actually a lot more, like they call thresholds, that we go through when we're going through death and dying and grief and loss. And There were like 16 of them, I think, that they go through. All of them are really, really beautiful, and they spend time talking about the different places that you go. And again, as you said, they created this huge community of people that are all able to communicate about that, those different levels, and those different thresholds.
And just like I just pointed out with Karin and Phoenix about having the possibility of the grief of children be so wide, like they cast a wide net. I will say that Mirabai also talked about casting a wide net for the different griefs that people have experienced.
Right.
We often think of grief as just being allowed for people who have lost a human being, or now we're like stretching out into pets. But in fact, there are griefs around the loss of dreams, around the loss of agency, around the loss of communities, of a tree.
Hmm.
Oftentimes we diminish those who are passing through this grief cycle and think, well, it's not as hard as or as heavy as an actual death of a human. In fact, different people, all of us, have different ways of dealing with our grief, and we are
Yeah.
sensitive to different losses. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that the Wild Heart Space community is also all encompassing and
Yeah.
supportive of all kinds of
Yeah.
little deaths.
Yeah. In fact, one of our most fun episodes in the next season is talking about that specifically. Actually, for that's one of our longest episodes ever, talking about all the different ways of loss and how we deal with loss. So
Yeah.
definitely stay tuned for those.
Yes. That was such a good one. It was so fun.
Yeah.
And we have Marcy Donaldson, who she lovingly addresses the gaps that we have in caring for those at the end of life. And she has really made an effort to have innovative solutions for those who want medical aid in dying, but are not in a state that offers this service. She founded a Hopeful House, and this is a service for families who need to travel to, I think, what state was it? Was it Oregon?
I think it was Oregon. Yeah.
To Oregon, and so that they can have their family member have a positive medical aid and dying event.
Yeah. Yeah. She
I
was also
appreciate
looking, sorry, she was also looking at Airbnbs, basically collecting a group of places where people could do that in her area, which is really cool. Should be done everywhere.
I love how she talks about finding it, like meeting the needs of the gaps, because
Yeah.
as folks go through any kind of end of life scenario, they will come onto their, I mean, every death is very unique. They will
Yes.
always find like something that's kind of hinders or hampers their ability to have the death that they want, possibly.
Yeah.
But I love that she has heard this and is stepping in to support this need.
Yeah. Yeah. So many cool guests.
Yes.
Several of them we met brought really kind of a new perspectives that we hadn't thought of in the past, to end of life care and grief loss. We met Pamela Bellier, who has created a grievers library, like one of these little community libraries that you see around now.
Neighborhood.
But this one is specifically to grief. She considered this kind of a passion project. When her son died, she found herself really wishing there was more literature, more things out there where she could find access to resources more about specifically what she was going through. And so she thought, why isn't there more access to this? She went to the library and still didn't find that much. So she created these little libraries. And my wife found one in our little suburban neighborhood here one day and told me about it. And I called Pamela and had her come and talk about this incredible idea of hers. She's put about, I think, 9 of them up in the Seattle area now. And she's dealt with some crazy, people burning them and tearing them up and stealing the books and that kind of stuff. But she's found ways around that. Like one of them downtown, she ended up putting inside of a cafeteria, which is a great idea. So my wife and I managed the one near us, and there's at least a dozen books a week that are taken from that library. Obviously there's a need out there for this. And so we really appreciate that project she put together. She's an amazing person in many ways.
Yeah, and what I loved about that too is how she manages to create a death book list for all kinds of deaths, like
Yeah.
veterans who have passed, or children, or pets, or people going through terminal illnesses, or I think I remember like even through Alzheimer's. So she's not just focused on death as a overall umbrella, but she's actually going out and researching the books that can help any number of folks struggling through an end of life. And
Yeah.
what a heart to go
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
look for those unique experiences for people to just kind of casually find them. She's like, they'll find people will find what they need in these
Yep,
libraries.
exactly. Yeah, she goes out and finds all the used books, and now she's actually getting grants, and then she'll sit right to the publishers, tell them what they're doing, and they'll send her 100 books. It's way cool what she's doing, and she does, like you said, she labels them. She puts little colored dots on them. It was a index on the side of the box on the side of the library. Says this is about children. This is about or for children and etc. So it's really beautifully done and just an incredible power. She's a power to be reckoned with.
I love that.
We met Fran Parker as well. And she really had told it was kind of, it was one of those episodes where you go, whoa, is that possible? And you have to kind of, suspend your disbelief or suspend your, scientific, objectivity or something
They're
and just be willing.
quantifiable.
Yeah, yeah. And be willing to accept that we don't know. We live in mystery and that things that we don't know about can really happen because she wrote it all down and she's a PhD author, and she and her husband both, and they kept track of the telepathic communications that they had with her deceased daughter and her mother. And it was profound the kind of connections they had, and the whole family was getting this. And in fact, her husband, being a scientist who is, kind of hesitant and cynical about the whole thing, until suddenly he said, "Oh my God, they're talking to me now." So, I really loved that episode. It was kind of like
Yeah, it was fun.
a step over the line in a way, and yet we ended up both of us feeling like, at least I'll just say for myself, feeling like, what do we know? We know there's more going on than meets the eye. We have very limited senses, so there's so much more outside of our stories that we believe. Um, Russell Young in an episode highlighted what he called a wind phone, and he installed it in his local church property. And it was just sort of as a symbolic gesture. It's basically a telephone booth, the old fashioned. Some of us may not remember what a telephone booth looks like, but he
Sure.
put a telephone booth with a phone in there that people can go in and pick up and just have a conversation with their loved ones that have passed. That was such a sweet idea. Yeah. Um, and then we had Gail Rubin come. She talked about how she speaks to audiences. She's a public speaker. She goes out and talks to audiences, and she uses film clips and humor to just talk about all the different things around the end of life. She also runs a yearly festival in New Mexico called Before I Die, which I highly recommend for any of you working in this or thinking about this.
Yes, she was such a delightful human being. I loved that she brought humor to a very seemingly dark topic. And for some people, like, they were like, "That's too morbid," or whatever, but she brought life and joy and just,
Yeah,
a je ne sais quoi to our
right, right.
folks.
And I think it's in our next season where we talk to somebody who's texting with his friend who died. So it might
That's
be that.
right.
Like, yeah, yeah. So this is really cool that people are having these kind of communications.
Yes. So I also wanted to point out that we met some folks who brought, amazingly, actually brought more information into my purview. I
All right.
thought I knew a lot about death and dying, and then I continued to learn. So I really appreciate these folks who brought it to my attention that I we have so much information at our disposal about the services that are rendered to those who are dying or to their families or to the grief work. But the big assumption is that they will be white, they will be middle class, they will probably choose between a burial or a cremation, and that they will be able to afford a proper funeral care service
Yeah, yeah,
after the person has passed. And I really appreciate that some of our guests brought this new awareness of the need to look beyond this typical mindset and
yeah,
see that there are people from all traditions, from all cultural needs, and they too have different dreams of how they want their bodies to be cared for after it has passed. We interviewed Tiana Dargent, who was so insightful with her compassionate end of life community care, highlighting the importance of inclusive and compassionate end of life care for the excuse me, let me start that again, to SLGBTQIA plus community. And still, that was another one that continues to kind of bubble up into my mind as we talk to, or especially we're filming this during Pride Month. And, I think about all the families who have disowned their kiddos who have come out as themselves.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
sometimes these families are not there to support that person at the end of life.
Yeah.
Or, if you go into a very corporate setting, maybe a trans person will not be given the ability to be dressed as they want to be dressed. There will be a
Right.
lot of assumptions based on their gender. And I appreciate Tiana's insightfulness into this because we do need to
Yeah.
share that there is a high need for supporting all of our brothers and sisters.
Yeah. Yeah. And making sure that they have expressed their needs and have someone that will fulfill their needs and give them the agency
Absolutely.
that they need. We learned the first part of that. 2S is two spirit, which is an indigenous word for the people who are non-binary, basically.
Mhm.
And I love that's added to the LGBTQIA acronym.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. We also had a time with Joelle, the Grave Woman, who and she actually has a YouTube channel
Yeah.
and posted a lot of her videos and offers culturally sensitive training for funeral directors. She emphasizes the need for cultural competency in death care and reflects on the spiritual aspects of her role, while also discussing the fears and uncertainties surrounding death. Wakil and I both heard her story at the one of the conferences that we attended. We heard her talk about a funeral director who thought that cutting off the dreadlocks of a deceased person was warranted. And Joelle saw that was about to happen and stepped in and was like, that's not okay. That's not appropriate. And she came to realize that a lot of people actually don't understand what it means. The idea of dressing somebody and making them look good is different for people. And those dreadlocks mean a lot more than just a hairstyle. It is actually a spiritual and a deeply cultural practice. So
Hmm.
she is an advocate for learning what is culturally available and expected for families outside the typical paradigm.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that story really moved me. And that actually, what was really um, especially profound about that was when she very first began working as a funeral director when she was very young. She had just graduated, she just started, and yet she walked into this room where her body was being prepared and had the compassion and courage to say to this more senior person, that's not the right thing to do. Stop, you know, which I love that. And I love that she's continuing to teach all of us around that cultural expectations.
We also had Deborah Grassman, who has serving 10,000 veterans at their end of life. And she actually said she served 10,000 veterans. Like,
Yeah, or more.
or more. Yeah, when we asked her, she's like, yeah, it's probably been more than 10,000. And she's reflecting on her experience in working with veterans. And I remember, I think she's from Florida.
Hmm.
And she also talked about how the impact of natural disasters comes into play with her work and finished off with the importance of grace in our lives. She was a delightful human as well.
Yeah, all of them.
All of them, every single one of them. And we had Laura Musselman, who spoke about her training caregivers at the Humane Prison Hospice Project. She discusses the complexities of self care in high stress environments like prisons and the need to support those who are stepping in to meet the needs of our incarcerated brothers and sisters.
Yeah, that was
What
great.
an amazing human being who,
Yeah.
again, like, I think I know it all, but I forget that there are pockets of living that I don't come into contact with.
I love that she was training the incarcerated people to support each other and
Mhm.
to basically be death doulas for the community in the jails.
Yes.
One episode that we hope we'll get to have next time, sometime soon, is with a lifer in prison, talking about the loss and grief around losing your freedom. So this is really profound to think about. As you said, this community that we tend to kind of put out of our minds, but is a growing, large community of human beings that
Right.
deserve deserve their agency, deserve their
Our thoughts and
integrity
prayers.
and our attention.
Yes. So we have this assumption again, burials or cremations. And
Right.
here's Mike Regan, the CEO of the Natural Funeral, who shared about these new and I'm going to say old technologies
Right.
in the natural body disposition. He is committed to teaching people about aquamation and terramation. And aquamation is when they put your body in a coffin with water and these fluids. this little special fluid that will decompose you in about 3 hours. And families like to take this liquid after you've been decomposed and spread it in their gardens or in whatever, patches of world that they would like to send you off to. And the other one is terramation, which are these coffins that they have with oxygen going in and out. And they place your body on it with some sawdust and some other just kind of natural,
Alfalfa, yeah, yeah,
yeah, anything
yeah,
earthy. And within 3 months, you're also decomposed. And I love that it's old technology in that we used to just bury people straight into the ground and their bodies would decompose. Their nutrients would feed another tree, some more worms and bugs and animals and the plants that grow. Like it would be a part of our life cycle, the continuation of ourselves into the world.
yeah,
And here's this, new old technology
right,
that allows people to remain true to themselves and give back to the earth with the least amount of environmental damage possible.
yeah,
We're learning that cremations are extremely toxic for our earth, not only in the amount of resources it uses to cremate you, but possibly like remains might be a little toxic too.
yeah, they
So
are,
this is just another new and old way to bring about
right.
our giving back to our Mother Earth.
Yeah, that was really good. Terramation, I thought it was sort of what we visited the Terramation places in Seattle area, and they are basically, it's a big compost bin. It's like, you know, it's specifically just like you would compost things in your garden, a compost barrel, and they put the right things in it, they keep it at the right moisture and the right air, and they turn it as needed. And then, of course, with anything, aquamation, terramation, cremation, the bones don't decompose as and so they grind those up and put them in. They said that the aquamation remains are much more like a white flour and are not toxic to the environment, where cremation remains, you don't want to put them in a little pond. It could kill every fish. They're very, very toxic. So anyway, I love that there are those opportunities to really think. And of course, green burial is now starting to be something too. One of our very first episode in season one was talking to somebody who works in Hawaii at a natural funeral home, and Bodhi B, and he really advocates for just putting you in a shroud and putting you in
Yeah.
the dirt,
Yep, as simple as
So
possible.
that's, yeah,
Yes,
like you said, that's old technology, right?
it's old technology, and actually, going back to Terramation, I have visited the warehouse where they keep the Terramation coffins, and they're not over here. We don't do the composting. We don't turn it. It's all just in a box, and it's
Hmm.
in a room. And I think there's one Friday a month where the people whose loved one is actually decomposing will show up, pull up a chair, and
Yeah,
just sit and hold space with their loved one. And
yeah,
I really appreciate that it feels like you have so much more time to integrate the loss and still communicate somehow with your loved one. And at the end of 3 months, yeah, if there are bones left, like they do have it become powdered and made to the cremains, but they'll offer you buckets,
yeah,
of soil essentially, of
yeah, yeah,
compost. And I know that they work with an orchard here in Colorado, or they have in the past. I'm not 100% that they're doing it still, but orchards and families can take this and put it in their garden, but you can literally compost your loved one.
yeah, yeah. I love that. Yeah, in Seattle, in the Northwest here, we have a big forest down in the southwest part of the state that they are specifically set up. They're reclaiming this forest, and part of that is that anybody who wants to can donate the remains from either terramation or aquamation to be put into the forest. You can basically, when you're done, you go down with a pickup and they'll fill your pickup up with a big bunch of dirt that you can use any way you want, or they'll put it in little bags or buckets, like you said. So I love that too. And I think one of the things that I've noticed about these organizations, it does seem like they're much more, maybe just because of the way they're working, they seem to be much more in tune with the sacredness of the body and the end of life, and inviting people to be there. They invite them to be there when they put them into in ours anyway, they put them into the little container, and they can be there with them when they slide it up into the little warehouse area. Yeah, yeah. So and they also have a weekly thing where people can just come and sit, have a glass of tea, glass of wine or a cup of tea, and
Yes. And
yeah,
it's
I
not
love
like
that.
slow food like that started like 20 years ago where everybody was like, "Oh, you need to slow down. You need to slow down
Yeah,
eating." 100%. Now we're doing like slow, reclaiming to the earth, right? Like it's not like a quick embalming, put you in a concrete box and then like stuff you in the earth, and in 3 days you're gonna be gone. Like that's it.
Yeah,
This is
right.
like
It
the
disappeared.
slow funeral mode.
Yeah, really caring for that.
Hmm.
As we, people who work, like all of us who have worked in this end of life world in funerals and such, hospice, that's one of the most sacred moments I've ever been involved in. And I'm sure it's true for Annalouiza and others, is that moment when someone changes over, moves over, and leaves their body behind. It's just an amazing thing. And so to worship that, or to acknowledge the sacredness of that, is just so wonderful and important.
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
wow. What an
Wow. What a
amazing
great,
season.
it was amazing, wasn't it? And the next one's coming up, and it's
Yeah.
looking really good. You can listen to any of these episodes. I hope you will. Links to all of the things we've talked about are in the podcast notes, so you can find out more about them, find out about the books and the work that they're doing, the organizations, the seminars, and the meetings that they have. Spread the word, of course, with your friends and loved ones. And of course, always let us know if you've got a story or someone you know has a story that they'd like to share. We're always looking for new and exciting and unique ideas.
Yes. Yes.
And I think we also have just published our first newsletter in the beginning of June. And so anybody who, if you didn't get that, be sure and let us know. We'll make sure you're on our mailing list. And we're going to start using Substack for that. And it did come through Substack. And we'll use Substack for our mailings, etc., in the future, and a good way to kind of keep up with what we're doing. And every time we do a new podcast, you'll be able to find it there as well. So, of course, the newsletter has kind of a conversation like we just had about past and future podcasts, and also some events and resources that are coming. And all of those will be online that anybody can attend. And of course, we always have poetry.
Yes.
So really, thank you so much for listening today, and be in touch.
Come back. Adios.
Adios.